We are currently seeing the most iconic chase cards from the Scarlet and Violet era start to see a pretty big dip in price. So that begs the question, is this the end of the bull market? Is the crash starting, or is this just a little correction along the way? I'm going to break all of that down, but we're going to start off with arguably the most iconic card of this era. And there's quite a few that we're going to touch on that I do think, looking back on this era, we'll look at like, oh, these are iconic cards. And pretty much across the board, we're seeing them all with pretty big declines. The Umbreon here leading the way, down 10% off of its pre-release numbers back here at 1600. We're finally seeing this card go down into the $1,400 mark for the Prismatic Umbreon. Now, if you can see, last sold's pretty consistent 14s and some as high as 15s. You got some as low as 1300s as well. So that current market price does kind of make sense. Fluctuating a little bit between that price. Lowest listeds currently are around 1400, which is right here, just barely over 1400, which is below current market price and below those most recent sales. So we'll see if this card falls into the $1,300 range. If it continues to drop in price, that'll be something very interesting to keep an eye on. So that's what we're seeing already with the Umbreon. Now, if you look at Prismatic, though, we're going to take a look at, after each chase card, we'll take a look at one of the boxes from the set. Now, we're not going to look at the PC ETBs because those are a more limited product, and I don't think it really applies. So for specialty sets, we'll look at regular ETBs. For normal sets, we'll look at booster boxes. Now, the chase cards are dropping, but the sealed product, for the most part across the board, is not. You can see, obviously, it is up. If you look at the past month, it's down a little bit, around 4%, but it's kind of holding steady for these ETBs, kind of around $140-ish. You can see it dropped a little bit. It was 140, now we're high 130. So the ETBs haven't really dropped a ton. They're kind of holding for the most part. So that's kind of what we're seeing there. Then you go over to one of the more popular sets that shot up in value very quickly, and that would be Surging Sparks. So you got the Surging Sparks Pikachu, the Cheeksachu, as I like to call it. This one's down about 12% from 486 down to 415 just in the past 3 months. Now you can see this card did shoot up big after release. It was $300, and then it shot up to almost around 500, and it's kind of been on a steady decline, right? So it doesn't look as crazy. 10% in the past month, 12% in the past 3 months. And the interesting point to note with the Pikachu, right, is that we are seeing sales below the $400 mark. You can see we're all in the 300s, high 300s. And the other thing that you're going to see is there's a high supply of this card currently available on TCG Player. We're looking at almost 150 copies currently available. So there's a lot more of these Pikachus supply entering the market. Lowest listeds right here, we're at 387, which is right at this most recent sale. So it looks like the Pikachu is going to continue to decline into the $300 mark. Now, addressing what I kind of brought up at the beginning of the video is this the crash or is this a correction? And we're going to kind of get towards that a little bit more at the end of the video. So stay tuned for that. We're just going to go through some product and then I'll give my thoughts at kind of at the end. Booster boxes for Surging Sparks. Now we talked about some booster boxes in a recent video, and that's kind of what made me start to think about this in comparison to the chase cards. Booster boxes for Surging Sparks are down only 5% in the past month. You can see they're still up in the last 3 months, but going from 260 down to the 248, not really too crazy of a drop, really. 5%, that's really not much in the grand scheme of things, so I'm not really too worried about that. You can see overall 6-month gains looking very good, 115% up on the Surging Sparks booster box. So the sealed side doing much better than the singles, right? At least that's what we're seeing so far. Once again, we got a few more sets to go through. Then we have another extremely iconic card of the era, right? The Charizard, the Sunzard. He's down around 15% in the past month. So that's a pretty big drop, considering he was about $300 down to around 240, 250-ish. 134 copies currently available on TCG. It is important to note, though, he's still up around 18% on the 3-month chart. And, if we zoom out even further, you are going to see that the card is still up, right? This is something we've talked about on the channel quite a bit. Obviously, the year chart looking really good, but even the 6-month, when you see explosive growth in the past, right? Usually after explosive growth, there is a certain amount of retracement that happens. It doesn't always happen immediately. You can see, like, even right here, it went to 200, came back down a little, and there's been little blips along the way. But this kind of looks like this is one of the bigger drops in price that we've seen on the Charizard in a while. So um, overall, it's not bad considering the growth is still really great, considering this was a $100 card a year ago. But a pretty big drop that we're seeing right now on the Charizard. However, we're seeing a lot of booster bundles coming into the market for 151, other sets as well. But there's an increase in supply happening, at least to a certain extent, for the Charizard. On the sealed side, though, regular ETBs 151 is kind of it's a very unique beast when it comes to sets of the era. Extremely popular, and regular ETBs are up around 45%. They're continuing to rise from 140 up into the 200s, and they've kind of just held recently since about March, the beginning of this month. So for about a month, they've just kind of held at just 200 or just barely over. So those aren't dropping either. We're not really seeing sealed drop alongside the singles drops that we're seeing. Next up, okay, the Bubble Mew. One of the most iconic cards, again, of the era. I do think, it kind of puts it in perspective. The Scarlet and Violet era shaping up. We're seeing the end. Destined Rivals, coming out soon, going to have some extremely iconic cards in it. But when you start to look, the Bubble Mew is one of those other cards that easily defined, unique art style. This one's down around 8%, but the drop is a little bit bigger. The 1-month chart doesn't show the whole thing. The 3-month chart will look worse when we get to this point. Towards the back and it updates, but 415 down to around 340, which is a pretty big dollar drop. You can see it was up 57% here, and then it's only up 30% on the 3-month chart. So the card is still up overall, like I said. So this is a fairly big drop in price, and obviously too, with a lot of these cards, the more you zoom out, the bigger the gains still are. But you can see, this card has done some retraces before. 300 down to 260, and then it shot up 400 down to 340. But supply being very high on this card, 177 copies currently available. So there's a lot more supply, I think, available than in moments in the past. You can see the amount of sales dropping, obviously, as the price of the Bubble Mew goes up. You can see there's a lot less sales per like few days, or however long this little chart is, each bar. So sales declining as price increases and supply increasing. So that's why we're seeing this drop here on the Bubble Mew, but around 8% in the past month. The ETBs are seeing a tiny dip, not really though, from 126 to 120. I would say overall still moving up. The regular ETBs are chugging up 63% in the past 3 months. Then we have my boy Magikarp from Paldea Evolved. Now, the Magikarp's getting hit pretty hard too. This one's down around 16% in the past month, going from 280 down to 230. However, this is another one. Most recent sales on the Magikarp. Look at these last two sales, $199 and $199. So we're finally seeing sub $200 pricing on the Magikarp. If we check lowest listed though, we are a little bit above that at $211. With $1 shipping, so $212 for lowest listed currently, which would be above those most recent sales, but still below the current market price. And it is still up on the 3-month chart. It peaked right here at 275, and we'd seen this happen before a little bit with the Magikarp. You can see back here, it ran up to around 150, and then it came all the way down to around 104. So almost about a $45 drop on the Magikarp there. And so, we have seen it before. It's not unheard of, but a 16% drop, it's a pretty big drop for singles. Then the booster box continuing to chug up though. That's why I've always preached that if you're looking to pick up product to hold, I don't do a lot of like singles investing speculatively. just because singles are more volatile. Sealed tends to do better over time. Obviously, reprints can play a factor. Everything, that's supply and demand, right? But especially in this current bull market, the uh, the sealed product tends to do better overall. It holds its value. The fluctuations do happen, but they seem to be a little less dramatic on the sealed side. So Paldea booster boxes are up 20% in the past 3 months, and they've been kind of at this 220 mark since late February, just kind of holding in that range. So, not dropping like the Magikarp. Then you have another iconic card of the era, the Greninja. This was, the most expensive card of the era for quite a while. This one's down almost 9%, dropping from 410 to 370 in the past 1 month. It is up on the 3 month chart, right? So it is also always important to note the time frames, right? I'm referencing pretty much everything on the 1 month because that's kind of where everything is dropping. And it kind of, maybe that's where it starts to look a little scary. And if you're like zoomed in, but when you zoom out a little bit, right, you get a little a refresh on the perspective, right, on where things are at. Obviously, 6 month chart, it is up 38%. I'm not trying to take that away, right? They're all up big pretty much for the most part. Overall, like look at 136 overall for the Greninja. And the Greninja, important to note, has had dips along the way. 300, down to 260, then it came up. So this could be a blip on the radar, but we are seeing, the interesting part is we're seeing all of these kind of happen at the same time. So that's where things start to get a little bit more interesting as you look at all of this. Then Twilight. Now, Twilight is one of those sets that was announced with the recent reprints, and we are seeing sealed down on Twilight. Booster boxes coming down around almost 12%, 11% from 230 down to just over $200 for the Twilight box. So this is kind of the first one where the sealed is moving down a little bit as well. You can see it's still up on the 3 month chart, almost 30%. 3 months ago it was not even 160, and now 230 down to just over 200. I'm not really too worried about the sealed aspect of it. So this one would be currently the exception to the rule, considering we're seeing the other sealed hold up pretty well, if not continue to climb in value. So Twilight Masquerade booster box is down, going with the Greninja, 11% and almost 9%. So those are kind of a little bit moving in tandem there. And then we saw our biggest drop here, which actually is the Terapagos from Stellar Crown, down around 26%. Now, this was the number one chase in the set for a while, value-wise. This has actually moved into second place. The Terapagos has been surpassed because of this big drop. Now, this is the biggest drop. 26% is quite a bit, percentage-wise, from $78 down to around $58. So around a $20 drop in 26%. It is down on the 3 month chart as well. The 6 month chart, obviously, this is one of those ones that is a little bit different than some of the other ones. I wouldn't say this card is quite as iconic. However, I do like this card, and I do think that this Pokemon, obviously heavily featured in the anime, I do think that this is a cool design, but not as iconic as some of the other cards. And you can see off of release, it just hasn't been able to, pre-release pricing, $150. Now this chart is typically what we would see back in the day before the market got crazy. This is more of your traditional release chart, right? Prices would pretty much for months continue to drop, and they would be very steady over time, and that's why you wouldn't want to buy singles upon release. Obviously, things have changed recently, but this is kind of what we used to see after a release would happen, right? The prices would come down until they would bottom, and then they would start to go up. And you could see, obviously, the supply being very high on this card. 286 copies currently available. So 26% in the past month, though, is very big. The Squirtle, it's barely over. It's a $62 card versus a $57. The Squirtle, we're not going to touch too much on this card, but now it is the chase card, and this one is down 16% overall. So the Squirtle is down. Really nice illustration rare. Obviously, big fan of this one. High supply available, though, 248 copies. When you get a lot of copies available, people they race to the bottom. They start undercutting each other. Undercutting each other until we find the absolute bottoms on these cards. So that's what happens when there's a lot of supply. People want to sell these, and they race to the bottom. Now, Stellar Crown, the boxes are up. Booster boxes are up 48%, going from 140 up to these are over a $200 box currently. So while the chase cards are declining, the sealed is continuing to rise. So that definitely bode, Stellar Crown, I would say, not one of the top sets of the era, more of a mid set. Although I do like Stellar Crown, I do like it a lot. I think the Squirtle and the Bulbasaur are great chases, and there's some other really great artworks in the set as well. However, comparatively, it just doesn't have quite as much strength to the set. So you can see Stellar Crown chase cards way down, sealed up. So that one's definitely two polar opposites there for between the singles and the sealed. Now, then we have Temporal Forces. Now, and we're also not going to look through every single set of the era. We were looking through most of them, right? But Temporal Forces is one where the chase card is up, right? It's up around 10%. The Raging Bolt went from sub 100 to over around 106-ish. So we have the chase card going up for Temporal Forces, so a little bit different. Chase card going up, booster box going up. Booster box is up around 40%. And supply a little bit lower on the Raging Bolt, 108 compared to some of those other ones. This is still a lot of copies still available for the Raging Bolt at 108, but not as crazy as some of the other numbers that we've seen on this list. And then obviously Temporal Forces, not quite at the $200 mark per box yet, just under 193 currently. And you can see most recent sales, there is a 160 sale, but before that, if you exclude that sale kind of as an anomaly, pretty consistent in the $190 range. So this is one where they're both going up in value. And I do think that one's a little interesting. So it's not a general rule across the board. It's not all chase cards going down, but it is pretty much all of them, most of them, right? Then lastly, to end it off, we're going to touch on Obsidian Flames. Charizard is down around 12% in the past month, going from 75 down to 65. Not the biggest dollar drop. It is a $10 drop, but percentage-wise, kind of matching up with a lot of the other chase cards that we're seeing. So the Charizard and closing in on 200 supply available. So a lot more quantity available for a chase card. Some of these earlier sets like Obsidian Flames, the pull rates were easier. So that does play a certain extent of a factor as well. But the booster boxes are up. The booster boxes are up almost around 40%, over $200 now, 211. Most recent sale, 214. So sealed going up. Obsidian Flames booster boxes going up. So to summarize, is this a crash? Is this the start of the crash, or is this a correction? I do not think that this is a crash. I do not think this is the end of the bull market. I think that this is just a correction along the way. And the reason is not that sealed can't drop. Obviously it can, but I think we're seeing a lot of sealed hold and or rise. And so that shows that, in my opinion, that just some of the chase cards, one, we're seeing a lot of supply coming in, right? People are opening more packs, right? So the supply is going up. We are seeing there have been a lot of restocks, reprints, whatever you want to call it, of a lot of booster bundles across the board of a lot of sets. And with other reprints being announced of the other booster boxes, we are seeing those supplies start to get high for the singles, and I think that that's starting to affect it, the supply entering the market for the singles. Whereas, at least on the sealed side, the boxes, even after they reprint, the supply just goes down. People open, and the supply continues to fall, versus when they open, the singles tend to go up. So I think we're seeing just a little bit of a correction. I don't think this is the end of this craziness. I think we're going to be maybe a little bit of a lull before Destined Rivals. We are seeing Journey Together prices, we talked about recently, they're continuing to drop, both sealed and singles. That doesn't super surprise me either. It's not, in my opinion, the strongest set. And so I think we're seeing a little bit of a lull and or calm before the storm before Destined Rivals. And I think that's going to kind of kick things off and make things crazy again as we start to get closer and closer to that date. We're still a ways out from that, being released, at least on the English side, but we will see the Japanese Team Rocket come out much sooner, and I think that'll start to fuel the fire a little bit as well. So I don't think this is the start of the crash. It very well could be, but I don't think it is. Nobody can know for certain. Anyone who says that they do know, they just there's just too much going on for anybody to actually know. But if I had to bet, I think it's just a little bit of a correction, a blip. Like I said, things move up. When they move up so quickly, so fast, it's only sustainable for so long, and then things start to catch up, right? You see it all the time. Other examples of where it happens a lot too, and supply plays a factor as well, but is like great on the graded side. You see cards come out and PSA 10 pricing going like really high, and then a bunch of people send cards off to PSA, and then they finally get them back, more supply enters the market, and you see that PSA 10 price drop. So it's all aspects of the market this kind of happens in. So that's why for the most part I try to do a lot of hold on to sealed, because it tends to just do a little bit better, it tends to be a little bit safer. But that's why chasing some of these singles cards at all-time highs can be dangerous. And that, like I kind of mentioned on before, it's not like that Bubble Mew, the Charizard, all these other ones can't take these 10% to 20% retracements and then continue to climb up over time. That's totally possible. But that's just why I'm a little hesitant when somebody says, "Oh, should I be buying at this price?" when we're like at an all-time high or just like near an all-time high. I get a little bit hesitant, and this is kind of why. And it's taken a little while to get to this point, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, with the Umbreon 2 from Prismatic starting to fall off, that's an interesting one as well. That one does have a much lower supply, obviously extremely difficult to pull. There 25 copies currently on TCG Player. So, it is affecting even the lower supply cards to a certain extent. So, it is something to keep an eye on. So, yeah, I think it's just a correction along the way. I don't think it's the start of the crash per se. I think we're going to have some, um, you know, as we move into summer too, as we've seen in the past, there's usually a lull in the summertime. I think people just, their attention just diverts. They're doing other things. They're putting their money elsewhere. As we're not there yet, obviously, but as we start to get closer to summer, people are doing other things. They're going on summer vacations, doing things with their families. This, that, and the other, and we might see a little bit of a lull there after Destined Rivals, possibly, because that's a late May release. So that'll be something interesting to keep an eye on, and then we start to like transition into the new era. So we'll have to see where it all plays out, and I'll keep you guys updated. If you're this far in the video and you're not already subscribed, do yourself a favor, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it, because I do daily videos, so you guys don't really have to do any research. You can just tune into the videos and you'll stay up to date on the market and everything that's happening. But that's all I have for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one, and remember, it was never a phase.